Hi, I'm Talia Baroncelli, and you're watching theAnalysis-news. I'm very excited to be joined by Latvian politician Igor Pimenov today. He'll be discussing his views on a potential plan which would ensure peace between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, so you won't want to miss that talk. If you enjoy this content and would like to help us out, you can give us a boost by going to our website, theanalysis.news, hit the donate button at the top right corner of the screen, and make sure you get onto our mailing list. That way, you always get an update every time a new episode is published. Feel free to share the show with your family and friends, and like and subscribe to the show on YouTube or other podcast streaming services such as Apple and Spotify. See you in a bit with Mr. Pimenov. Joining me now is Igor Pimenov. He is a member of Concord, which is a Social Democratic Party parliamentary group running for the European Parliament elections in Latvia. He was a member of the Riga City Council in Latvia between 2005 and 2009, and served as a member of the Saeima, the Latvian National Parliament, between 2009 and 2022. He's still a member of Concord, and of course he was born in Latvia, where he graduated from the Department of Physics and Math at the State University of Latvia in 1975. As a Marxist, he's been politically active ever since then, being in the Soviet Union and now being in what is now current-day Latvia. In 1996, he founded an NGO which works to preserve general education in Russian for the Russian-speaking minority in Latvia. So thank you very much for joining me today, Mr. Pimenov.
Thank you for the invitation. It's kind of you.
So I wanted to start out with the war in Ukraine. On February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. And I first would like to ask you what your assessment is of this war and why you think President Vladimir Putin launched it in the first place.
I regard this war as a colonial one. I have several times repeated it during different interviews, and I still emphasize my stance here. I guess I would say it's even stronger. It's imperialistic war. Although Ukraine as a part of the Soviet Union was one of the legal construction of the USSR, still it was, let's say, the western part of the great Russian Tsarist Empire before 1917. Later, the war for independence began in the territory of the contemporary Ukraine, which resulted in the proclamation of Soviet power on that territory of modern Ukraine. But later, Ukraine became one of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union. But still, for the central power in the USSR, the Ukraine remained although one of the 15 republics of the Soviet Union, but still one of those which provided much resources to the economic development of the country, of the Soviet Union, also a great human resource, but also ideological and intellectual resource. So we have a very confused mixture of dependence of the Soviet Union on the former part, which really was, let's say, the margin of the Russian Empire on the one hand. On the other hand, Ukraine provided much resources to the development of the Soviet Union, and also administrative resources, as many leaders and the frontmen, servants in the administration of the Soviet Union originated from Ukraine, from Kiev, from Dnipropetrovsk, from Odessa. And so me, as a man which was born in the Soviet Union 71 years ago, still regard Ukraine as part of my former motherland, which disappeared in 1991, as you know. So, and now looking at what happens in contemporary Russian now, I conclude that there are many legal and illegal forces, and many people still regard Ukraine as something that is a part of Russia, that should be withdrawn back to the motherland rather than make its own way to Europe, choosing its way of making its economy in the way it likes, just sharing the same values that sometimes, which is usual for Europe, but is not usual for the Russian Federation. So, on the other hand, I should admit that Ukraine, regarded by those political parties in different parts of the world, in the United States, in Western Europe, as something that can be used as a challenge for the future development, political development, and strengthening of the Russian Federation, which became an independent democratic state in early 90s, though facing huge problems, sometimes very devastating problems for common people, and these problems are still in the agenda of contemporary Russia. Therefore, this competition for influence in Ukraine was in the agenda as of the first day of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Judging the war, I would say, and the invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, I say I condemn this invasion. I regard it as aggression, as a clear-cut violation of international law. I stand for territorial and integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and I believe that after the independent investigation, war criminals must be punished, regardless from what particular country they originate. That is my position, and I would like just to emphasize it. Also, please mention just quite personal attitude. I was born, as I've told you, in the Soviet Union, and the Ukrainians are as close to myself as Russians and Moldovians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, and all other people belonging to different ethnic groups in the former Soviet territory. And therefore, to launch the war against the people which belong to the same community means more than criminal. It's a catastrophe. And this catastrophe will damage badly also the future, the coming future of the Russian people. So, therefore, the solution of this, not the making, so the reasonable solution of this political diplomatic solution should be found soon, if unless really this problem can be solved only in the warfare that makes this problem even more difficult for the solution. I hope I managed to explain my attitude and the reason why I'm so active judging on this matter now.
Well, at the moment, it seems like neither side is really interested in a negotiated settlement. I mean, Ukraine has just recently received a huge aid package, a military aid package from the United States, and Russia is currently making some more gains in the Kharkiv region, which kind of borders, which is in the Ukrainian eastern borders along Russia. So it seems like the war can just continue for years at the current pace and have huge casualties. Many military experts would say that Russia is actually doing much better and that their economy is actually doing better as well, despite the Western sanctions on Russia. I mean, the IMF, for example, last month said that this year alone, the Russian economy will grow by 3.5%, which is actually more than the growth rates of France, of the UK, and of Germany. So that there's still, huge exports of oil. And even though it's difficult for Russia to perhaps get some military equipment into the country, in general, their economy is quite strong, and they've been able to isolate themselves from some of the other problems of the global economy. So given these factors, what would you say is necessary to come to a negotiated settlement? And perhaps first you could actually explain what your idea would be to achieve peace in the region. You speak about a multilateral agreement in which Russia would withdraw its forces from Ukrainian territory, including from Crimea, and in return, NATO would have to be disbanded. So why don't you explain that plan of yours?
I'm going to be more attentive in detail in order not to make mistakes. I'd like your listeners to understand what I'm going to propose. First of all, I would say that all this military assistance, which is provided by the government of the United States, of course, it fills the resources, the arsenal of Ukraine. But please be taken into account in the final outset, the war that began is not the war of military resources, of guns, airplanes, and machine guns. It's also the war of the infantry, of artillery, so of human beings which are involved in the warfare. So Ukraine, in these terms, is not as large as Russia. The human resource of the Russian Federation is incomparably larger on the one hand. On the other hand, so the damages caused to Ukraine over the last 2 years and a little bit more are enormous. Ukraine lost a good deal of its GDP. It reduced to some, I can mistake, but more than 20% if compared with the year 2022. So in these terms, even the United States and other allies of Ukraine, which stand on the side of Ukraine after the 24th of February 2022, do all their best for making Ukraine army stronger. It will not solve the solution. Ukrainians themselves will keep on participating in this war, and nobody would assist them in the field. So I think that the way which is now taken by both parties involved, I mean from the Russian side and from the Ukrainian side, leads to a threshold. It makes no sense to do even stronger efforts for making greater victories in the battlefield. It will cause only more people perish, and I support those oppositional politicians in the Russian Federation, for example, who say that the first step that should be done is stopping fire, as otherwise we shall lose more tens and tens of thousands of young males, people, strong, clever, that could contribute to the development of their countries, both in Russia and Ukraine. On the other hand, all proposals for possible armistice sometimes are senseless, as they practically will be used by both sides, but first by the Russian Federation for further strengthening of their military might, rather than for further development in the way of making peace stronger. That is for now. If we really want to find a solution, we should do our best for making such a kind of an agreement that could feed all parties involved, to make all interests of those parties which are involved in this conflict. I do not mean only Ukraine and the Russian Federation. I mean also those countries, those states, those groups of influence in the West which are interested more or less, sometimes financially more than in a different way, in order to make them calm down and do not be interested in developing this conflict in future. Therefore, I believe that what is really necessary is to sign a kind of multilateral single package agreement, which is constituted of 4 pillars, and these 4 pillars have to be committed in a single package necessarily, so simultaneously. Namely, firstly, I think that the withdrawal of troops of the Russian Federation to the borders of 1991, that is to a borderline of Ukraine it had when proclaimed its independence. Secondly, a treaty between Russia and Ukraine should be signed. I will say about it a little bit later. Thirdly, dissolution of NATO and dismantling its military bases in Europe and around. And fourthly, collective guarantees of peacekeeping for all states in Europe that constitute a new Helsinki Agreement or Helsinki Accords, let's name it Helsinki II. The agreement has to be simultaneously beneficial for all states, as I said. So for all parties involved, it's very important that all parties should be interested in, for its own reasons perhaps, but still the ultimate result should be beneficial for everybody. It's not possible to leave anybody in a sense of defeat and bitterness. So, for example, if Russia achieve so-called victory in the battlefield, Ukraine never forgive neither Russia nor the Western countries that it lost its territory, it lost its sovereignty, perhaps even within in a smaller territory of the country after the eastern part will be seized by the Russian Federation. We should find such kind of solution that make all parties feel fed up. I would say this word. So it's quite clear that everybody wants that Russia withdraw its troops to the borders of 1991. That is, to the borders of the Ukraine, which it had right before the proclamation of its independence. The borders of the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist republics within the territory of the USSR. Everybody understands this requirement, and I shall not speak about it longer. But it's necessary to explain to people staying outside Europe, perhaps even in the Western Europe, it's very important just to consider the future of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Let us recall that NATO was organized, was arranged, was established, and was fed by many, many countries all over the world around the Atlantic Ocean in order to counteract possible aggression of the Soviet Union. After the Cold War is over, it looked that all reasons for making NATO just abolished, as well as the Warsaw Pact was abolished at that time, was quite evident. Still, NATO remained, and I regard NATO in the time being as part of the as a kind of, let's say, a rudiment of such Cold War epoch. So I guess it would be quite reasonable. There is no peril, there is no challenge for the world that could prove that NATO is necessary. I understand that smaller countries, for example, such country as Latvia, which I stay in, where I reside, where I was born and still I stay here, are interested for NATO to be a kind of umbrella that would make their life safe. As Latvia is located right at the border of the Russian Federation, they believe Russia can attack Latvia any moment. So therefore, it's quite necessary to achieve the agreement of collective with guarantees for all countries which are located in Europe, not only for Ukraine, but also for the eastern countries of Europe, Latvia included, but also for the old Western democracy residing as from Great Britain till Italy, Spain, and Greece. I think it's quite reasonable. I think this solution will make all parties satisfied. Also, I would like to emphasize that please remember that one of the participators of the Cold War was China. It is considered that in the Cold War the United States and the Western Bloc won, but the Soviet Union collapsed, and therefore so the Western cities, the Western countries, the Western states are those who are the winners. But please remember that China, who was the participant of the Cold War as well, did not lose. Are you regarding China as a loser? Please look at this economy, at its social possibilities, its competitiveness in the international market. China is one of the, let's say, world tigers who is going to develop even stronger. Some 20 or 40 years later, if nothing changes in the economy, all of the world will be divided into two parts, China and others, and nobody will be interested. Is there a difference between a Frenchman or a Finn or a Spaniard? So everybody in this world, which is called usually as a Western one, will regard themselves as one which counteracts China. So I think this counteraction should not be a military one, it should be a competitiveness. But what I wanted to say that if we achieve such kind of multilateral agreement in Europe, ensuring security for all states in the European continent, it will make also the competition, the challenges which are brought forward in relations with the Chinese People's Republic even softer. So it will bring peace not only to Europe but also to the whole of the world. And after that, I guess Europe and the United States of America will open a new era in relations with China. Therefore, it's very important, while looking for the solution of the Ukrainian crisis, to find such kind of solution which open new space for development of the whole of the world, peaceful development of the world. It's very important, I would guess, once again, not only for Ukraine or for some other countries which are more or less involved in this war, but also for the whole of the world, also for the countries which do not participate in this war or provision of any commodities to Ukraine at all. That is my position. That is my proposal. I'm sorry if I speak too long.
No, not at all. I wanted to pick up on a few important points that you made. You did address the fact that despite conscription in Ukraine, Ukraine is having a very difficult time filling its military ranks. A lot of younger men have fled Ukraine, and it seems like some either very, very young men or else older men over the age of 50 even are fighting in the Ukrainian army because there aren't enough men between the ages of 18 and 30 or so to fight. So the death toll the death toll in general has been horrible in Ukraine, and Ukraine doesn't have the human resources, as you said, as Russia does. So this is a really important factor to keep in mind. But you did say that this current or your proposed multilateral agreement could be fashioned along the lines of a Helsinki Agreement, and you're referring to an agreement which was initiated during the time of the Soviet Union under Brezhnev. Could you explain briefly what that agreement was and why you think it would be something to emulate?
I would not mention all details of that Helsinki Accords, but as a matter of fact, what is important for myself, the final result of these accords were signed by all countries of the European continents together with the United States and Canada. So it meant that it was favorable for all countries in the European continent, regardless of their social or political structure. I remember quite well, on the western part it was important to make the Soviet Union open its borders and to soften its human rights politics, which at that time was sharply criticized, and I agree that criticism was fair. It was one of the solution in order just to make people residing in the Soviet Union feel better and enjoy human rights opportunities after 1975, when that agreement was signed. So now I guess it's possible as well. But please, just now, after I try to display those 4 pillars of this multilateral single package agreement, it's very important to mention that one of the key prerequisites of this agreement is the treaty between Ukraine and Russia. And when I speak about this treaty, otherwise Ukraine will not be satisfied with any Helsinki. What Ukraine wants is the sovereignty and territorial integrity. This sovereignty and territorial integrity must be acknowledged by the Russian Federation. The sovereignty within the borders of 1991. Next, it's necessary to provide the personal immunity of everybody who resided in Ukraine, in the territory of Ukraine before the war and by the day of signing of this agreement. Also, property of all kinds has to be safeguarded, restored, and reimbursed if lost. Russia has to pay its reparations, war reparations. And next, in the regions of Ukraine where people identifying themselves as Russians reside, a dual Ukrainian and Russian citizenship has to be possible. The Russian language has to acquire a status of an official language, or at least education at all levels has to be ensured in the Russian language along with the Ukrainian language. So Russian speakers, as about 80% of Ukrainian residents speak Russian at home, only in Russian or Russian along with the Ukrainian one. So the position of the Russian language should be one of the crucial points in this treaty between Russia and Ukraine. But please mention this balance between the sovereignty on the one part and the integrity of Ukraine as part of the European Union, perhaps in future, on the one side, and then all these details, let's say, in hyphens between Ukraine and Russia, can balance each other and make the world in Ukraine more fairer, just, and I believe that those who indicate at Ukraine as a part of Europe where the Russian language is attacked, is vulnerable, those hawks in Russian contemporary politics will become down. It will be fair. I've been in Ukraine many times. I studied in Ukraine for some months as in 1977, right after my university. So I understand those people who stay there. They do not want. They have nothing against Russia. They have nothing against Russian Federation or Russian language, at least those who stay in the central part of Ukraine. I understand that Ukraine is different. There is a Western Ukraine, there is an Eastern Ukraine. So, and this discrepancy of different Ukraines perhaps make this conflict even more dangerous for the future of this country. But still, I guess the treaty between Russia and Ukraine, in the nutshell, makes the whole of this multilateral single package agreement tangible and prospective.
I do have a follow-up question, though, because you're asking for the current Russian leadership to give up quite a lot, at least according to their perspective. And I'm not endorsing that perspective. I'm just saying I'm sure they would be happy if NATO were to disband, and perhaps they would consider that to be less of a threat on their borders. But if you're saying that this is a colonial war and that there are such great ties between the Russian Federation and Ukraine, as well as, huge resources in the Donbas region and in other areas of the eastern part of Ukraine, then why on earth would they want to give any of that up? I mean, if they're interested in maintaining this colonial war, if their economy is still actually doing quite well, what sort of incentive is there for them to enter into this agreement? Of course, there would be peace and NATO would be disbanded, but with the current Russian leadership, how do you see them actually getting to that place?
Yes, the colonial character of this war is something which I insist on. I guess it's one of them of the internal springs of this activity of the Russian Federation administration. Certainly, it is. On the other part, what was so? Please consider the Russian Federation of one of the world geographical map, a huge country, an enormous country, which very long border, and the logics of contemporary foreign policy is that the intensity of foreign policy of any state is proportionate to the length of this borderline. So the borderline of the Russian Federation is larger than of any other country all over the world. Therefore, they look, if they want, let's say, to preserve. Let's just step to the position of the Russian Federation leaders just for a sec. They look at the borders of the Russian Federation in the West, and they see that some 1,000 kilometers from it, a lot of different military bases are located, bases which originates from NATO, from the NATO plans to withstand the possible activities and military hostile activities of the former Soviet Union. But as soon as the Soviet Union does not exist any longer, those bases still are active. They develop. They they are supported militarily and economically from different European states, which in turn are very strong economically. Even the Netherlands, for example, although it's a small country if compared with any other country in the Eastern Europe, but it is still one of the constructions of NATO. Also Norway, and also Turkey, and even Greece. So Russia should take into consideration these particular objective circumstances for planning its security development in future. If NATO is abolished, if the bases are dismantled, there is no, at least, any, for those people who listen attentively to the arguments of the Russian Federation, there are no serious arguments why Russia should regard Ukraine as a menace where NATO can dismantle its military bases in future. Now, when NATO is outside the agenda of the contemporary European politics, so there is quite new conditions, quite new arguments, even for the society of Russia, for those common people who really are convinced that NATO is an enemy. It's a sleeping enemy. It can attack the Russian Federation any moment. And what they have done in Ukraine caused the reasonable activities of the Kremlin administration. So we should lose this situation, making all suspicions vanish both in the east and in the west of Europe. Therefore, it's very important, let's say, take into account this position. Also, what I haven't mentioned yet during our conversation, nobody cancelled the doctrine of Paul Wolfowitz, which was arranged right after the collapse of the Soviet Union by Paul Wolfowitz. His position was he was the United States Under Secretary of Defense for Policy. It was a gentleman which invention and political project was taken into action by the administration of President Clinton, and although it was softened, at least it was proclaimed it was softened, nobody said that still the United States does not regard itself as the pillar of contemporary world, as a military and economic gendarme of the world. So this doctrine is still considered as one of the challenge, not only in the Russian Federation but also in other countries. So some countries regard this doctrine as the base for their security. On the other part, this doctrine sometimes can be considered as something hostile for the sovereignty of different countries. Russia is among them. So I think that the present, and now we're talking, practically speaking, about the next administration of the United States, the very fact of cancellation of this doctrine in future, proclaiming that never ever the United States of America will regard any region of the world as something which the United States should provide their domination in future would be very important. But all this goes just in line with the necessity of dissolution of NATO, is at least to an extent which I wanted to explain to you.
And on that point, the United States has demonstrated many times its disregard for what it terms the rules-based international order. I mean, there's a difference between the discursive function of this so-called rules-based international order and the actual body of international norms and laws which have been instituted ever since the Second World War. But the United States, with its invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, et cetera, has, and also, I should say, with its supply of weapons to Israel, even though Israel has been undoubtedly committing war crimes and acts in violation of international law, the United States in doing so has demonstrated its, its appetite for being a hegemonic power and disregarding international norms. So that's always a huge factor when discussing Russia's aggression and Russia's contraventions of international law. I mean, we need there has to be some sort of consequences for the United States to ever expect Russia to fall in line and to respect Ukraine's sovereignty.
I would only mention, I'm sorry just to interrupt, if I interrupted you, but
Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention only one particular event which you mentioned also as well. So it means the aggression against Iraq by the administration of George Bush. It was really something that confused the liberals in the Russian Federation and all over the world. Nobody believed that such a country as the United States would break all its oaths and obligations concerning the implementation of national law. Whatever there could be in Iraq, who is Saddam Hussein, whether it was his responsibility for the attack to the Trade Center in New York or not, but still to invade the country, to kill many people there during the first day of the aggression, it was something against the ideals which were proclaimed by the United States of America at that time, and which are now also, I guess that the administration later, that different other administrations of the United States, I mean Barack Obama, make their homework for improving and for of the mistakes made by the previous administrations. But still, we can judge that in the nutshell, the doctrine of Wolfowitz is still in action. Therefore, sometimes it's not easy to speak with people who stand in favor of the Russian Federation military politics in Ukraine now. They say that all that happens is the continuation of the first years of this century. It's a continuation of the consequences of the Iraq aggression, American aggression in Iraq, I say. So it looks tricky, but still there is some sense in these arguments as well. So once again, I believe that I would not like just to divide the responsibility, let's say to separate the responsibility between different states concerning the war in Ukraine. It is entirely the responsibility of the Russian Federation, I mean the leadership of it. I guess that let's say some people say that Putin is going to restore the Soviet Union. It's not true. Putin is going to restore the Tsarist empire of the last century, of the last half of the 19th century, of the Tsar Alexander III. He speaks about the Soviet Union and about its experience, about its achievements, its history. And all that the Soviet Union and people residing in the Soviet Union did in this 20th century with the great color of and shedding of negligence, I would say. He is not the adherent of the Soviet Union of the restoration of the USSR. He is the adherent of the restoration of the Tsarist Russian Empire. I guess this way is wrong. It makes Russians suffer, perhaps not as Ukrainians suffer now, are suffering now, but suffer in future. Therefore, I guess this war should be stopped with all the instruments which are in the hands of contemporary diplomacy and peacekeeping people all over the world. Even our conversation is one of these episodes as well, I guess.
You've just been watching part 1 of my discussion with Latvian politician Igor Pimenov. Join us for part 2, where we'll be discussing the risk of nuclear war given the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine.